Good evening. I'm Craig Chemaly, owner of theintelligencenews.com, and I'm joined today by Ricardo Baretzky, president of ECIPS, the European Center for Information Policy and Security. Mr. Baretzky is an expert on global cybersecurity threats and has consulted governments around the world as well as some of the largest corporations. He's also director of the Criminal Investigations Bureau at CYBERPOL, the international cybersecurity organization charged with policing cybercrime. Mr. Baretzky, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Craig, and I'm happy to be on your show.
So we'll just jump right into it here. Reports we hear about all the time on the news of the cost of cybercrime. Oftentimes the numbers are in the tens of billions of dollars that the reports are claiming that we lose in cybercrime. Since most of the time what's really being stolen is just information, how do you determine the dollar figure that's been stolen via cybercrime, and do you believe that most of the numbers are accurate that are being reported?
Oh, Craig, that's a very, very good question. There's many ways to quantify the cost, or such as cost, the expertise, the research and development, R&D, cost of patents, depending on the kind of data that was stolen, or through espionage, which is a common process today. And these figures could potentially even be vastly underestimated. I'll give you a good example. If you have a new aeroplane for military purposes, or fighter jet being developed, it probably costs a few $100 million to design it, to have it patented. And, well, if it's stolen and it costs maybe $5,000 or $5 million stops to have it stolen, then the organization or the company or the government who's stolen the IPO has actually gained a profit in the sense that they have the copy of the IPO. The government who is the losing party is the one who's got to cover the cost because they could start all over again. So one of the hurdles and problems at the moment is that government is not adequately protected against the risk of espionage. And with the growing threat of the global espionage wargaming at the moment, it's very difficult for governments to keep a control. However, the figures that we see in the financial markets or released by different companies such as McAfee and some of the others around, they do not take into account the complete picture. Therefore, the possibility of these figures being vastly underestimated is a very real possibility.
So you feel as though these numbers may actually be on the low side?
Yes, I think there's a very strong possibility that they are. Why? Because government is not going to tell the public what level of capital is involved in their operations, particularly the black ops. The U.S. government has a $52 billion budget annual for intelligence alone. The black budgets could be in the trillions of dollars. Nobody really knows. The same with China. And to quantify the real cost is almost impossible. And a very difficult task. However, the corporations who is partnershiping with governments, they're the ones who pay the price. And the governments often have to reallocate their structure and position with the corporations that they are doing the business with. For example, if you're a major company doing a small part of this particular design, now your company has been compromised in the process. Then the lobbying has to go back and tender. It's done with a closed door session. And the government literally has to start from scratch. So not only do they lose the IPO, but they lose the time. And that time could be years, besides the R&D cost.
So now that we've got a better understanding of how cybercrime is quantified in terms of dollars that it may cost, you mentioned China in there. We here in the U.S. have, it seems, weekly been getting reports of Chinese hacking groups getting into everything from the Postal Service to some low-level White House computers to more critical infrastructure. Would you say that we're in a de facto state of cyber war with China, or with anyone for that matter?
I would confidently say that at this point in time, we could be a couple of years already into cyber warfare. We call it cyber gaming or cyber warfare, not in a conventional sense, but in the sense that it is escalated. If we look back a few years ago, it started off with small-time hacking, but now it's escalated to the point where you've had the U.S. shut down for 2 weeks at one stage in the White House. You had the Belgian government shut down earlier this year for a few months, in fact. It took them a few months to get the system out, or the infection out of the system. And we've seen a drastic escalation, not only between the U.S. and China, but between the countries that involve the Western society and the East Bloc. And we've seen a major escalation daily. In fact, there is a lot of rumors, as you know, and even though the U.S. claims that they are under several millions of attacks every day, it's not only the U.S., it's also Europe, it's also China, and it's also Russia. So from the position of security and national security also versus the monetary value and cost, there's definitely not only a cyber warfare going, but also a monetary warfare that is affecting the cyber warfare. So these two is playing hand in hand, and it's escalating rapidly over the last year.
That sort of actually leads into my next question, which is, if you go to any store here in the U.S. and you pick up a product, chances are it's going to say "Made in China" on the bottom. And we spend so many billions of dollars there that, one has to ask, why would China risk that relationship with the U.S. consumer over cyber war? And then sort of as a piggyback to that, if I could, just as a piggyback to that, it would seem as though we're allowing it. It would seem as though we're not doing very much about it. We're not punishing them in any way.
Well, once you ask the question, is it really only China, and is it really being allowed? If you look at the present e-commerce position, at present the e-commerce globally stands roughly 16% of the global market versus the standard traditional business we know. It's estimated that by 2020 it will grow to roughly 49%. We estimate between 2025 it will tip the 50% market. That means that in 15 years from now, you'll buy more than 50% of all your products, whether it's home or government, you're going to buy online. So it doesn't matter really where the product is being manufactured or shipped to. What matters is where has the business taken place and where's the point of entry. And what is important to understand this is the difference between the physical borders that you're dealing with and the virtual borders that's not been established. The virtual borders is the one that affects the government. The virtual borders is the one that affects the legal right of IPO. And not only the IPO, but also that of taxation and many other issues surrounding it. So one has to look at the product and say, well, what's the point of entry? For example, when you're into the shop or Walmart, pick up an item and you say, well, this item comes from China. But where did the transaction take place? You probably would find that the actual transaction took place in China, not on U.S. soil. So how did that happen? Because the cyber system is developed that the business could take place in any position where it's most lucrative for the buyers. That in itself is not a major risk. What is a major risk is when the currencies is played against each other in the process. That is just as good as a cyber warfare. Because putting these two together absolute recipe for disaster in the future.
This is sort of just an opinion question because, I know that you're based in Europe, but there must be some reason that the United States doesn't seem to be hitting back strongly against countries that they are certain are conducting major cyber, I don't know if attacks is the right word, but major cyber operations. Do you have a sense of why we're not sort of being more aggressive in countering these attacks or these operations?
Well, very difficult to define whether an attack actually does happen from a specific location. Right? At the moment, everybody's working very strongly towards infiltration of third to seventh layer securities. At the moment, China is probably the leader in that. The RSA in China is on top of things. They could literally track any MAC address at this point in time, even if it's up to 6 or 7 layers. I doubt very strongly if the NSA has this capability at this moment. They're trying to get there for sure. But let's, for example, say you have a US citizen who is anti-government, or anti the present government. If he wants to make it look like it's China, all he has to go and make sure he has a 7-layer encryption, log into a VPN from China, and he hacks the US through an open port. That certainly makes it look like it comes from China. But the same happens then again in China or in other places. That is one of the real dangers of the virtual border being open. Because until such time that the virtual border has not been defined, and one of the things CYBERPOL is working very closely together with BorderPol, the World Border Police Organization, is to establish where is this border. And until we have defined that border, it's a very risky business to say, well, all the tax happens from China. Certainly a large amount do, and vice versa. But to make the accusation without the border in place would be the same as launching an atom bomb incorrectly.
So, in other words, somebody could be sitting in a room in Iran and making it look as though they're coming from China, or vice versa.
Correct. And this is one of the problems the government is facing, because they haven't realized the power of the internet as a whole yet. They're only beginning to understand the power of the internet, because we must remember that the internet has many applications, and one of the most important applications is positioning. You could have somebody sitting in a desert, and he can run a very successful business and never leave his tent. A good example was the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, which ran a lot of the operations from secure lines in a small computer. Even now, it is still a problem whereby all data can be recorded but not necessarily accessed. So, both in the commerce world and the legal world or the terrorist world, the same principles exist. One of the major problems, recently ESIP did a study, and we made a major publication on this for the BorderPol, which was released just over a month ago to the BorderPol magazine. And we found, and this came after 370, by the way, because Flight 370 was a big issue, as you know, for the US and everybody else. But we were looking at what is a risk in airports. And one of the things we found was that it would be very easy to hack any country from a virtual airport or from within an airport. Why? Because data in the Wi-Fi arena from airports is unmonitored. Now, assume you have a terrorist that has an active role. He does fly on a transit flight through the US. In a transit flight, he will have access to the Wi-Fi. If he make a cyber launch attack from a laptop or a cell phone, he could literally get on the plane 2 hours later and be in another country. He could do the same from there. And he can keep on doing that. If we apply the same principle, the hackers who is specifically hacking banks, could very easily go to a country, hack the New York bank, go to New York, hack the Chinese bank, and 2 hours later take a plane to Dubai and hack the European bank. And the most interesting, all three countries or all three territories will think they have been attacked or attacking each other. Now, why is this an issue? Because we have not pushed very hard enough for law enforcement to wake up. And government is a little bit slow in the policy development, and they haven't realized yet the power of this glooming and epidemic that's coming. Now, has it happened? Of course it's happened. In fact, last year we had a very good incident where a youngster in India stole $3 million and managed to transfer it to 2 other accounts. And even though he was caught after, there was no proof that he was the owner of the money eventually. And how did he do that? He used Wi-Fi that was an open source, access to the internet. So granting people access to the internet should be regulated in some way or form in order to establish a border. And until we do that, we're going to see an increase not only of cybercrime, cyber warfare, but also espionage. And the biggest problem this have is that it could happen very badly.
So that leads actually into my next question, which is from Michael from Colorado. I'm going to withhold his last name. We've been talking about these attacks on sort of intellectual property, IPO, attacks where people are stealing information or they might steal somebody's bank card. Are we in danger of an attack that might do something a lot worse? I mean, that's bad, but something that might shut down our power grid, something that might reset our stock exchange, something that might affect all of us in a way that would create havoc, almost like a digital 9/11. Is that a real danger? And if so, who are some of the groups that you think might actually have that ability?
Well, Greg, this is probably the most important question you've asked. And at the same time, in question, very sensitive. So I've got to be very cautious of how I respond. But I believe that such a threat is imminent. The question is where and when. This could be in many, many ways. Unless we allow the security modules to be in place prior to the release of products, we are risking this particular problem. Unleashing the internet without the proper security measures in place is, of course, a natural risk. I think the problem that we have is that, and not only one particular government, but as a whole, is that there's always a backdoor. And the internet is a vast arena that is still in the early stages of exploration. Is such a potential threat in existence? I would not be able to confirm that directly. But I can say this, that I would not be surprised if there is a glooming threat that has not yet been detected. We find new viruses, malware every day. The snake virus was one of the big ones that caused major problems in many parts, partly designed by the US. But then we have other viruses like Stuxnet, and now there's new ones slowly emerging. There's 2 or 3 new ones, in fact, that governments is pondering over where it derived from, because they know it's not theirs. Let's take the reality. We have a very unstable Middle East. We have a growing tension on the Russian border. We have NATO scratching their head at the moment. Should one of these oppositions exploit the cyber possibilities, such as ISIS, for example, utilizing the cyber capabilities, the danger is a very, very, very real threat. And unless the governments, the US, Europe, points around table, I am afraid to say that we're heading for major problems. One thing is to wait for the fire, but it's a complete other thing to wait till a house is burned down. I think that, and this is part of ESIP's module as well, to warn about the dangers. We detect the dangers long in advance. And I think that it's very important to understand that unless we find a measurable control now, this threat will
Mr. Baretzky, one final question, and we really appreciate your time. If you could advise, at least from the intelligence news perspective, if you could advise the United States government on what's the biggest step they could take, what's the most important thing they need to do right now to protect our country from a major crippling cyber attack, if there's anything they can do at all?
Well, I would like to slightly rephrase it, because the advice would be not only for the US, it will coincide with Europe and the allies. We have to take measures. We know there's risk. We have to implement a legal strategy and a legal platform which will put an official border in a cyber world. Unless we have predicted and implemented a virtual border and monitor very closely who's access on that border, we are certainly heading for big problems. The danger that economists feel this would have is that it could affect the growing market in the cyber market, which they know is at the moment part of the financial institutional development across the globe. However, if we give preference to financial development versus the safety and long-term existence of government, then we have missed something very vital. And I think one of the immediate things that the US has to do in conjunction with Europe is specifically focus on the regulation that implements. I'll give you an example. We have a lot of terrorist activities happening on the internet at the moment. One of the problems with these activities is making the arrest. So often agents would go in, they will be inside the field, and if they're lucky, they finally get an arrest. If we have such legal system in place, they don't have to wait to exercise or diffuse the threat, because there's many different acts it can be done under. One of them being the Anti-Terrorism Act, which was part of two major conventions signed, one being the Budapest and the other one being the Lisbon Convention. So I think it's very important that the governments pay attention to the present experts and listen to what's really going on, and not only focus on data, because the word on the street is far more powerful than the data in the computer. And unless they give attention to atmospherics, we call it atmospherics, or real-time information, RTI, I foresee that they're going to have to come to a point where they have to make drastic measures. And it could eventually affect the economy.
Mr. Baretzky, we really appreciate you taking the time to come on. We've learned a lot here. We hope we'll be able to have you back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on your show.